He wasn't supposed to be home yet. The mansion was supposed to be silent, the marble corridors swallowing his footsteps like always. But as Ricardo Wellington stepped from the shadowed foyer into the east wing, he heard it, the sound that had gone missing from his home for months. Laughter, a child's bright, bell-clear laughter pouring through a half-open door, his son. Before we begin, if this kind of story speaks to your heart, feel free to share where you're reading from. It's always beautiful to see how far stories like this can travel. Enjoy the story. Chapter 1. The sound before the storm. Ricardo stopped dead in the hallway, a rare uncertainty touching his usually decisive gait. He checked his watch. He was 2 hours early. The house didn't know what to do with him when the sun was still out. Staff who normally rotated like clockwork shifted their schedules around his absences. His wife, Sophia, learned not to plan dinner until the city's lights reflected silver bruises into the windows. This was the rhythm of a billionaire who had turned his entire life into work. Work to outrun grief, work to outrun guilt, work to outrun the truth that money could not fix everything. The laugh fluttered again, like a bird testing a healed wing. He moved toward the door of Daniel's room, every instinct caught between hope and dread. Daniel, 5 years old and born with mild cerebral palsy, had not laughed like that in months. The therapy appointments were disciplined. The equipment he'd bought, top of the line. The specialists, world-renowned. And yet his son had remained a quiet, hollow-eyed child who seemed to fold further in on himself with each passing season. Ricardo reached the door and pushed it, only to realize it was already slightly ajar. Through the gap he saw them. Elena, kneeling on the floor next to his son, her knees pressed into the carpet, the dark brown of her skin warm against the pale wash of the afternoon. Her hands, calloused, sure, supported Daniel's small legs. She wasn't just playing. She wasn't just comforting him. She was guiding him through a series of careful movements, her fingers marking the line of a muscle, thumb locating a trigger point, coaxing it awake. She hummed as she worked, something like an old hymn, notes braided with breath. "And up, little warrior," she whispered. "I know it looks impossible, but you know what we say about the impossible." Daniel's face pinched with effort, his lip caught between his teeth. He concentrated. He lifted his left leg a few centimeters, nothing and everything at once. When it landed, he gasped, then giggled, then laughed. "There you go." Elena's praise filled the room like sunlight. "That's it, Daniel. That's stronger than yesterday." Ricardo's grip tightened on the doorframe until his knuckles whitened. All the emotions he had learned to swallow roared up at once. Fury, how dare she? A maid putting her hands on his son, unqualified, unauthorized. Confusion. Why did Daniel seem to be enjoying this more than any of the sessions he'd paid for? And something that burned within, humiliating and strange, envy. Because his boy looked at her with shining trust, with a kind of love that Ricardo had no idea how to earn. He was still hovering there, breath caught, when Sophia appeared at his shoulder, a cup of tea in her hand. Her surprise flickered into a soft smile as she heard the laughter. "Elena has a special gift with him," she murmured. "Since she started, I've seen Daniel come back to us in ways I didn't think were possible." "You knew," the words erupted before he could temper them. "You knew she was doing this to him." Ricardo, Sophia's eyes lifted to his. They were tired, patient. She was beautiful in that way tired women often are, elegant in the softening, in the choosing to remain. "Look at him, just look." But his gaze had already returned to the scene inside. Daniel, damp-haired and glowing, hugged Elena with pure, unguarded affection. "Thank you, Auntie Elena," he said. "Tomorrow I'll lift both legs, you'll see." Ricardo's chest clenched. Auntie. He didn't know the last time Daniel had called anyone by such a warm, familial word. Elena kissed the top of the boy's head gently. "And I'll be right here to watch." When she turned her face slightly, he saw it, composure, humility, and something else, expertise. Not the faking it kind, not the bold, reckless kind, a quiet confidence born of repetition. How could a woman he'd hired to scrub counters and fold linens speak about tendon activation and neuromotor patterns as if she had studied them? He stepped back, the door whispering shut on the scene. The light dimmed in the hallway. The laughter continued, unbothered by the storm gathering at the threshold. Chapter 2. Glass kitchens and hard truths. The kitchen had always been Sophia's favorite place in the house, because it was the only room that remembered to act human. The smell of garlic and butter sometimes softened the edges of the walls. The staff joked here. The windows opened here. And this is where Ricardo found Alina the next afternoon, slicing strawberries for Daniel's snack with the neatness of a parade soldier. Alina. His voice was too controlled. We need to talk. She set the knife down very carefully. She didn't reach for a towel to busy her hands. She didn't begin apologizing as he'd expected she would. Yes, Mr. Wellington. It's about what I saw yesterday in my son's room. A small pause. Her eyes flicked up to meet his. They were brown and steady, a hint of worry swimming in them. I can explain. Explain what? He couldn't help it. The anger pushed through. Explain why you were playing doctor with my son without my permission. Her face flinched. I wasn't playing, sir. I would never. You're a housekeeper, he said, the word landing heavier than intended. My housekeeper. Alina took the weight of it. She didn't recoil. She just absorbed it, like the earth takes a sudden downpour without quake or crack. The urge to lash back flickered across her expression and died. She took a breath. I'm sorry, she said softly. I didn't mean to overstep my limits. Daniel, he was so discouraged. I just wanted to help. Ricardo's eyes flashed. It would have been easier if she had snapped or made excuses or accused him. Her humility disarmed him, and somewhere in the hollow where his fury had been, something painful began to bloom. Where did you learn those techniques? He demanded. You shouldn't even know the words you were saying. For the first time, something like defiance brightened Alina's gaze. Not insolence, truth, rising to the surface at last. My brother, Miguel, she said. He was born with similar challenges. There wasn't money for therapy. So I learned, I watched. I read in libraries and printed out research papers and sat on the floor with him for hours until we figured out what worked. I gave him my nights, every night. For 12 years. And, he was aware of how brutal he sounded. He couldn't stop. And now he runs, Alina said simply. He plays soccer. He dances badly at parties and thinks he's funny. A small smile ghosted across her face. The doctors said he would never do any of those things. The image, this faceless boy transformed by a sister's stubborn love, stabbed through Ricardo's armor. All his money, all his connections, and some woman he'd decided belonged to the shadows had coaxed out a miracle in his own home when he wasn't looking. You had no right to decide anything about my son's treatment. His voice was softer now. No right at all. You're right, she said again to his surprise. I should have asked, but Daniel was sad, Mr. Wellington. She looked past him for a second toward the window. He tried to hide it. He didn't want to disappoint you, but he is 5. He needed someone to tell him the impossible wasn't a wall, just a door he hadn't learned to open yet. Daddy, Daniel burst into the kitchen, panting with the effort of movement, his crutches clicking as he navigated the tiles. He was beaming. Can I show you what I... Daniel, back to your room. Adults are talking, Ricardo said automatically, almost reflexively. The light fell from Daniel's face the way light falls when a cloud moves in front of the sun. Alina crouched beside him, her voice a soft bridge. Hey, how about you wait for me in the living room? 2 minutes. We'll work that new game where you chase the pillow monsters. Daniel brightened. Okay. When he left, Alina stood and faced Ricardo squarely, chin set. Mr. Wellington, she said, her voice gaining quiet volume, for 6 months I have watched your son fight. I have watched him swallow tears because he thinks they are too expensive. I have watched him accept that he is a problem to be solved, instead of a boy to be loved into strength. Ricardo stared at her. His pride bucked, his shame bloomed, and in the middle of that wild tangle, something like admiration took root. He said nothing. She didn't tap out. She held the silence until it ached. My methods are not magic, she continued. They are patient, and they are hopeful. Sometimes what a child needs most is not a machine or a famous name. He needs someone to see him whole. She swallowed, her composure tracing the sharp line of dignity. I promise I will never make decisions without asking you again, but please, watch him with me. Watch what he can do. He left the kitchen without answering. He didn't eat lunch. He didn't take calls. He went to his study and made 3 decisions while his coffee went cold. He would install additional cameras in the home, ostensibly for security. He would assign their feeds to his phone. He would learn who Alina was when nobody was looking. Chapter 3. What the walls saw the house gave up its secrets in grayscale clips and timestamps. Alina arrived early, an hour before her shift. She left late. On a Sunday, she came. On a holiday, she came. When she thought no one was watching, she was not just cleaning and cooking. She was building something out of air. Daniel's room changed. In the footage, a chair became a support for balance drills. A line of pillows became a path to string steps together. Rubber bands from the laundry room transformed into resistance tools. Plastic water bottles filled with sand became weights, labeled with cheerful stickers, Level 1, Level 2, Level 3. She knelt beside Daniel, always at his height. She corrected his foot placement with 2 fingers and the patience of a sunrise. She noted things in a spiral-bound notebook: Daniel's mood, what made him laugh, how many seconds he held his balance, what song seemed to help. Every entry dated, every barrier respected, every small victory celebrated. She never asked for more hours. She never mentioned it to Sophia. She never once looked into a camera. She wasn't doing it to be seen, she was doing it because she could not do it. And Daniel flourished, not dramatically at first, but a fraction taller, a fraction bolder. He tripped differently because he dared more. He fell in ways that looked like practice instead of collapse. Ricardo watched his phone like a man starved, and at night, when the house went dark, the only light in his study was the dim blue so often associated with addiction. But this wasn't gambling or markets. It was a father learning his son all over again through a lens. It should have been enough. It wasn't. On Thursday, when Alina left after 8, a worn canvas bag hung from her shoulder. Ricardo hadn't seen it before. It looked heavy. She slipped out quietly, head down, as if rehearsing invisibility. He didn't call his driver. He didn't tell anyone. He took his coat and followed her into the night. Chapter 4. The long way home. Alina took 2 buses to the edges of the city where the streets told different stories. The paint peeled differently here. The rhythm of a block was a song for those who understood it, the chorus of tired women, the off-beat laughter of teenage boys on corners, the percussion of dogs and music and children learning their address by heart, just in case. She walked down a block whose cracked facades had been patched with care and entered a small, low house with a sagging porch light. Ricardo parked half a street away and waited. He told himself he didn't know why. The truth was less flattering. He needed to justify to himself the thing he already knew he would do next. After nearly 2 hours, the door opened. Alina emerged with a teenager who looked so much like her and also like himself, lean, brown, the kind of hands that come from both work and play. He had a slight limp, subtle if you weren't looking for it. But his stride was free. They walked to a nearby square where a group of boys were already tossing a ball between them, their movements loose-limbed with anticipation. Miguel, the boy, he knew it was Miguel, joined the chaos without ceremony, greeted by hollers. The game began. Ricardo stood by the fence, anonymous in his suit among windbreakers and hoodies. He watched Miguel move. The limp didn't disappear, but it stepped out of the way for something else: speed. He cut across the court with more precision than some of the executives Ricardo had fired for indecision. He faked left, then moved with such confidence to the right that even Ricardo felt his weight shift to follow him. "Come on, Miggs," someone yelled. "Respira in tau bota procurer." The boy laughed and ran harder. Alina sat alone on a bench, her bag on the ground, her face soft with a kind of bone-deep pride. When she noticed Ricardo at the fence, the pride shuddered. She stood, straightening, defensive by instinct. "Mr. Wellington," she said when he approached her, "what are you doing here?" "Following you," he said, because lying would have been an uglier violence. "I wanted to understand why you care so much about my son." She stared at him, then at the field, then back. "I don't know what you want me to say. That you did this to impress me, to get something, because this is your audition." He hated the insinuation as he voiced it. It tasted like poison. "The truth?" she asked. Her voice was flat. "My brother is my truth." Miguel whooped as he scored. The boys piled on him, shouting his name. Alina watched, her voice threading itself back to softness. "When we were kids, the doctor told my mother what he always told mothers in our neighborhood," Alina said. "He said there were limits and we should learn to accept them. He said we should be careful not to hope too much." She swallowed. "So I decided to be stubborn. I copied the names of muscles from borrowed textbooks until my hand cramped. I memorized stretches. I begged therapists to let me sit quietly at the back of their rooms. I took notes. And then I carried my brother across our living room and asked him if he trusted me." "Did he?" Ricardo asked before he could stop himself. "He did." She smiled without turning her eyes from the court. "I was 12 and he was 8, and he was so mad at me for a year." She laughed. But then there was a day like today. He moved differently, and then another, and then look at him. Ricardo looked. He held his breath and then let it out. Daniel is not broken, Alina said into the silence. He's a boy who was handed a heavier weight, that's all. If he learns to carry it with help, if he learns that effort is a love letter to himself, he will be okay. He wanted to argue. That was his reflex. He wanted to say things like liability, like doctors' opinions, like why didn't you ask me, like what gives you the right. But the field kept insisting on itself. Miguel kept insisting on himself, and there was something else in his pocket. His phone vibrated with a calendar alert for a meeting he would not attend. It felt far away, ridiculous in its urgency. Miguel jogged over, sweat shining in the city's streetlight glow. "Ella, who's the suit?" he said, grinning. "Friend or foe?" Alina pressed her lips together, her eyes flicking with a warning. "My boss," she said. "Mr. Wellington, this is my brother. Good to meet you." Miguel offered his hand, not deferential, not aggressive, just a hand. Ricardo shook it and felt the strength there, the newness of it, the handshake of a boy who had been told to sit down and had stood up anyway. "Heard you're the one whose kid laughs loud," Miguel said, almost shy. "She talks about him like he's hers." Heat crawled up Ricardo's neck. He nodded. "He laughed yesterday," he admitted. "The words were an offering. Like you said." Alina's gaze softened. "Good." Ricardo drove home in silence. His mind ran ahead to a future he couldn't see yet, tugged by a momentum he had not created. It scared him. It lit him up. He woke the next morning to the memory of Alina's canvas bag. He wasn't done. Chapter 5, Night School. They say cities are honest at night. The illusions go to bed early, and what's left is the truth under streetlights. When Alina slipped out a few days later after 9, bag slung over her shoulder, Ricardo followed again, careful from a distance that felt less like stalking and more like penance. She took the bus this time to a community center he had never noticed before, though he had driven by 1,000 times. The sign out front sagged. São Pedro Community Rehabilitation Center. The word rehabilitation had been hand-painted by someone with steady hands and faith. Inside, he found warmth that had nothing to do with the thermostat. Alina moved through a large room where about 15 children were gathered, each different and each in that moment exactly the same, eager. The floor was matted with foam squares, the walls painted with cartoon animals. The equipment was improvised. The joy was not. "Good evening, Teacher Alina," a chorus cried as she came in. Teacher, not maid, not housekeeper. Not Alina snapped from the top of a staircase. The room shifted like plants towards sunlight. She set her bag down. Out spilled rubber therapy bands in every color of the rainbow, homemade weights made from sand-filled water bottles duct taped at the joints, scarves for games, and stacks of laminated cards she had clearly made by hand, pictures of exercises and encouraging sayings. She led them through a session that would have humbled the professionals Ricardo had hired, not for technical complexity, though it had that too, but for the nuance with which she moved between children. She adjusted a boy's ankle with 2 knuckles knuckling under. She played a call and response rhythm game to coax cadence from a shy girl. She needed a tight hamstring with gentle persistence while singing a lullaby that made a toddler laugh mid-stretch. A 7-year-old girl with braces on both legs clung to Alina's hands at one point, eyes fixed on her feet. "Want to fly?" Alina asked. The girl nodded fiercely. "1 step," Alina said. "That's a wing. 2 steps, 2 wings. We don't need to fly far, just here, that's enough." They moved. The room stopped. The girl took a step, then another. She lifted her face to the ceiling and laughed through tears. Ricardo swallowed hard. For a long moment, his wealth meant nothing and everything all at once. It meant he had failed to notice this place. It meant he could change that. He stepped out into the hall to compose himself and saw a corkboard plastered with flyers and announcements. In the corner, pinned with a thumbtack, was a letter with a logo he knew too well. The Wellington Foundation. He pulled it closer to read. "Dear São Pedro Community Rehabilitation Center, we regret to inform you that your application has been declined at this time due to insufficient track record and unclear impact measurement." The letter was 2 years old. It was signed by a director at his foundation, a man who summarized entire neighborhoods with 2 words: high risk. Ricardo closed his eyes. He found Alina after the session, wiping down mats, exhausted. "Why didn't you tell me?" he asked quietly. "Tell you what?" she said, startled. Then she realized where they were. She realized he had watched. She flushed and nearly apologized out of habit. "That you're a teacher," he said. The word felt good in his mouth. "Oh," she busied herself with a rag. "I'm not officially. Do you have a qualification?" She stilled. When she lifted her eyes, the fear was back, but so was the resolve. "I have a degree," she said. "Physiotherapy, full scholarship. I finished 3 years ago. I applied to every private hospital and clinic within an hour of home. They all asked for experience in private clinics. I had experience in living rooms and free clinics at night." She shook her head, voice steady with practiced resignation. It wasn't the right kind of experience. He didn't know what to do with his hands. He put them in his pockets, then took them out. "And you took the job at our house because I needed to pay rent," she said bluntly. "And because I'd heard you had a son with cerebral palsy, I thought I could help quietly, if you let me." Ricardo found himself smiling in spite of everything. "I didn't," he said. "Not really." "No," Elena said, a flicker of hurt she was too dignified to parade. "Not really." He drove home with a letter folded into his coat, stinging his ribs. The next morning, the house woke early. Daniel's laughter was less miraculous now, just a part of the weather. Ricardo went to the kitchen, still raw from what the night had shown him. "Elena," he said, because one thing he could do was start with an apology, but the universe had other plans. "Daddy." There were no crutches in Daniel's hands when he ran into the kitchen. He didn't run, not yet. He walked, careful and almost floating with the focus of it. 3 steps. 4. He crossed the threshold and flung himself into Elena's arms. "I did it," he cried. "I came here by myself." Time slowed. The sound of the refrigerator hummed like a faraway plane. Somewhere, something fell, Sophia's teacup smashing into 100 pieces on the floor. Ricardo's chest cracked open. He dropped to his knees, the cool tile greeting him. He held his son, feeling the small, humming muscles working. "I'm sorry," he whispered into Daniel's hair. He realized as he said it that he was apologizing for years. He lifted his head, tears hot. Elena was stepping back, the familiar choreography of her life. Make yourself smaller, make space. He reached for her without thinking. "Don't leave," he said. He hadn't meant the words to come out like a command. They didn't. They came out like a plea. She nodded once, eyes shining. "I owe you more than gratitude," he said, "and I owe you an apology I don't know how to make." Sophia crouched with them, hands reaching, face alight with joy and something else, a release. "We owe you everything," she said. Elena shook her head. "You owe me nothing. Daniel owes me nothing. He owes only himself the truth that he can." "Still," Ricardo said, standing, the part of his brain that had built empires snapping back into service. "There's work to do." Chapter 6. The rebuilding of a man. Ricardo could have written a check. He didn't. He wrote a plan. First, he asked Elena to officially become Daniel's physiotherapist. He asked, didn't order. He offered a salary reflective not of what she had been paid to scrub floors, but of what her knowledge, labor, and value deserved. He offered to pay for continuing education if she wanted it. He offered to double whatever the highest bidder would offer. She refused. He offered less. She laughed. "I will accept to take care of Daniel as a professional," she said, "but only if we also take care of children who do not live in mansions." "Agreed," he said, relieved to be told what to do for once. Second, the São Pedro Center. He brought in a crew at midnight that first weekend, because sometimes the thing that changes a life is drywall and new paint, but he didn't just renovate, he rebuilt. He made sure the building could breathe. The bathroom doors widened, ramps built by men who had never thought about the angle of a wheel. He hired a team not because Elena asked, but because he watched the way her shoulders dropped when she realized she would not have to carry everything alone. He asked her who to hire. She gave him names. 2 physiotherapists joined her, a brilliant woman named Thalita who had learned to budget interventions to the rhythm of the street, and a gentle man named Oscar who had once been told he was too quiet to lead. He hired a child psychologist and an occupational therapist and 2 patient aides who turned the waiting room into a place where children forgot waiting was supposed to be boring. Third, he called a meeting at his foundation that afternoon. He stood at the end of the table and said words his board had never heard him say. We were wrong. He told them about the letter on the corkboard. He told them about structural bias. He asked them to change the metrics by which they would judge impact. He asked them to widen their imagination around where power and skills show up. You're asking us to be activists, one of them said, half joking. I'm asking us to be human, Ricardo said, and I'm asking us to remember that our money works for us, not the other way around. He didn't tell Alina about any of this. He sent her a text instead, late at night. I can't undo yesterday, but I can build a better tomorrow. Sleep well. She didn't reply. She was likely at the center. Daniel changed most and least. He was still a child who hunted frogs by the stream when they visited Sophia's mother. He was still the boy who cried when he couldn't do something perfectly until Alina taught him to adore, almost. But also, he was luminous. He climbed steps one at a time, then two. He fell and laughed about it. He grabbed his father's hand when they passed a runner in the park. Daddy, he said, as if sharing a secret, I'm gonna run with them one day. You already are, Ricardo wanted to say. He squeezed Daniel's hand instead and matched his son's rhythm. Sophia cried more, but in a way that rinsed her clean. She found a version of herself who didn't have to be poised to be strong. She tagged along to the center, first as support for Alina, eventually on her own. She read to waiting siblings. She made a chart for fair toy sharing that would have impressed a judge. Do you want to sit on our board? Alina asked her one day, half joking. Board of what? Sophia asked. Of our lives, Alina said. They both laughed, and it stuck. People asked where the money had come from for the transformation. The truth was easy and complicated. The money came from guilt and love, which is to say it came from the same place all good money eventually comes from when it's finally doing its job. Chapter 7. Another first 3 months later, the center glowed. The sign out front had been replaced, the paint crisp. The name had been changed. The Alina Miguel Institute of Child Therapy. Alina protested. No, she said. Absolutely not. People will laugh. They'll say I named it after myself. Miguel will make sure everyone knows you didn't, Ricardo said. And if they laugh, they can come here and watch a child take a step for the first time and see if they can laugh through that. Miguel certainly didn't laugh. He took a picture of the sign and made it his phone background. He dragged his friends to the front door and told the story of a 12-year-old girl who refused to be told no. He started coaching an adapted soccer team for kids who wanted what he had, the joy of sweat and the math of movement. On a morning in autumn, with the smell of rain hinging in the air, Ricardo arrived at Daniel's school because his son had been given an assembly slot to talk about his journey. 7-year-olds were not known for things like journey, but Daniel had insisted. He stood behind a curtain and watched his son walk onto the stage alone. Hi, Daniel said into the microphone, steady, small chin lifted. My name is Daniel Wellington. A year ago, I thought I'd never be able to do stuff other kids do. Now I want to tell you about the impossible. He talked about the day the impossible began to move, a day that started with a laugh. He talked about a woman who showed him how to press his heels into the floor and how to love the word try. He talked about falling 1,000 times and how each fall was a friend who taught him something new. He talked about the first time he walked to the kitchen and how his daddy cried. Miss Alina taught me that the impossible is just a big word for something we haven't practiced yet, he said. Also, she taught me that you don't have to have the fanciest stuff to do the best work, you just have to have the biggest heart. The room applauded for a long time. Kids clapped with both hands over their heads. Teachers wiped eyes. After the assembly in the hallway, Alina stood stunned in a small circle of light, incandescent bulbs make. Daniel ran to her and jumped into her arms, heavier now, strong. He wriggled down and turned to his father. Daddy now, he whispered. Ricardo handed Alina an envelope. She looked at it like it might explode. What is this? She asked. A stack of bureaucracy, he said, and a door. Open it so we can walk through it together. She opened it. Inside was a letter from the country's top university, full scholarship for a specialization in pediatric physiotherapy. There was also a partnership contract binding the institute's funding for the next 10 years, under Alina's leadership, accountable to a board she had helped assemble. The contract included a clause that made Ricardo smile when he'd first added it. All hiring decisions must demonstrate active bias interruption and community representation. Alina's hands shook. She looked up at them, the family she had helped stitch back together. I can't accept this, she whispered, the old scar of unworthiness responding to a saltwater tide of love. You can, Sophia said, taking her hands, and you will. And the next time someone tells a little girl to lower her gaze, she will not have to remember how you argued to make space for yourself. She will remember how you walked through a door someone built and then held it open from the other side. Miguel leaned against the wall, smiling with his entire face. "Sister," he said, "tell me again about the impossible." They laughed, and then they went to lunch with the kind of hunger that comes after joy. Chapter 8. The Work We Do. 2 years later, the Institute was loud in the best ways. It had the sounds of therapy sessions, yes, but also birthday parties, and a whiteboard in the front office where parents scrawled things like "Culture of Hope." There were weekly meetings where Alina and her team argued passionately about protocol, because they had the luxury now of arguing about best instead of cheap. There were school vans idling out front to bring children from distant neighborhoods whose parents worked 2 jobs and could not always make the trip. There was a garden in back where older kids planted things that took time because sometimes the best work is also the slowest. The methods they used were studied by universities that had once ignored those neighborhoods, then adopted and adapted with credit. Alina insisted on co-authorship. She insisted on paying the women who cleaned the floors a wage that made them feel like partners. She insisted the lobby be bright, that you could smell cinnamon sometimes and hear music often. Daniel, 8 now, had become the Institute's unofficial ambassador. He arrived after school and did his homework on a couch that had seen enough stubbornness to be a wise couch. He showed younger kids how to fall without giving up. He wore a small pin on his sweater with the Institute logo and answered questions as if he were 50 and an elected official. He wrote a pamphlet for a class project called "How to Cheer Someone On Without Being Annoying." Ricardo once stood by the doorway of the therapy room and watched Alina work. 2 interns hovered beside her, taking notes. She demonstrated a stretch, a weight shift, and then stepped back to let the mother try. "You have this," she said. "You, so he knows that when we're not here, this house is strong." Later, when the room emptied, Ricardo found her on the porch sipping coffee. The evening folded itself around them. "I learned something I didn't expect," he said. "What?" she asked. "That the hardest thing wasn't the apology," he said. "It was letting go of the story I had about myself, that I was the man who fixed things with checks, that I knew better, that I was too busy to make soup." He smiled, a little abashed. "Now I get to be the man who shows up. Who cancels meetings for soccer practice, who hangs shelves." Alina laughed. "You're not very good at the shelves." "I know," he said, shameless. "I am very good at showing up, though." Her smile softened. "You are, and that is everything." They sat for a while without speaking. The city hummed a lullaby. Inside, Daniel yelled with delight at a card trick Miguel was teaching him. "Do you ever think about that day?" Ricardo asked finally. "The day I came home early and made a mess of it." "All the time," Alina said frankly, "but not because of your mess." She turned to look at him directly. "Because that was the day I heard Daniel laugh like he could hear his future. That's what I remember first." Ricardo let his head drop, humbled. "Thank you," he said for the 10th and the 1000th time. "For what?" she asked, almost teasing. "For teaching me how to be a father," he said. "For teaching me how to be a man." She rolled her eyes. "I taught you ankles and hamstrings," she said. "You did the rest." They both knew it wasn't true. They both let it stand. People deserve their myths as long as they make them kinder. Chapter 9. What we keep late. One evening, long after the last child had left and the halls were quiet, Ricardo walked through the Institute alone. He trailed his fingers along the wall where quotes had been handwritten by children in big, uneven letters. "We practice until our muscles fall in love with us." Anna, age 7, "If you fall, you're just practicing gravity." Joe, age 6, "Impossible is a word grown-ups use when their hearts are tired." Daniel, age 5, kept there even after he turned 8. He stopped by the corkboard near the entrance. The old decline letter from the Wellington Foundation was framed there now, next to a new one. He had asked Alina if she wanted the old letter taken down. She'd laughed and told him it made a good story. The new one was brief, unsent, and meant for their lobby only. "Dear past, we were wrong. Thank you for teaching us how to be right." He turned and saw his son at the end of the hall, silhouetted in the doorway, legs slightly apart, hands on hips, triumphant simply because he existed. Daniel saw him and waved. Behind him, Alina laughed at something Sophia had said. The sound hit the pitted places in Ricardo and made them smooth. He thought of all the thresholds he had crossed without realizing it. Doorways of confession and pride, hallways of fear and permission, rooms full of laughter he had walked by. because he was running from the sound of it. He thought of the first time he had called Alina by her name and not her job. He thought of a kitchen where time had stopped and moved again. Most of all, he thought of a 5-year-old boy laughing behind a half-open door and the woman kneeling on the carpet, hands gentle and sure, humming a melody that said, over and over, there is a way. People liked to tell the story of the billionaire and the black employee as if it were a parable about charity. They missed the point. This wasn't a story about charity. It was a story about return, of a father to his son, of a man to himself, of a community to the version of itself that could name its own power. On his way out, he paused by the sign. The letters were clean against the evening sky, the Alina Miguel Institute of Child Therapy. Ricardo touched the cool metal, a kind of benediction. He would leave tomorrow for a short trip, the first he'd taken in months, to speak at a conference about reimagining philanthropy. He had his notes. He would say the word love and mean it. He would say the word bias and refuse to make it gentle. He would talk about the day he opened a door and someone else walked his son through it. He turned toward home. The night felt like an invitation. And somewhere, back in the beginning of everything, a boy laughed behind a door and his father stopped in the hallway, one hand pressed to the frame, the other to his chest, shocked at how quickly a life can pivot into beauty when you're brave enough to believe the evidence of your own eyes.